A turning point. That's how French President Emmanuel Macron described the G7 summit in France. Now, he and other European leaders arrived at the event with a worry about what Donald Trump would do next now that the Iran crisis is cooling. Would he turn his focus back to Ukraine? Because he could reshape the entire course of that war. And so they urged Trump not to accept the concessions Russia demanded. Here's what Trump said on day one of the summit as Ukraine was brought back to the table.
Now that this is finished, we're going to be focusing on that, see if we can get that one done. 25,000 people a month are dying, mostly soldiers, and that shouldn't happen. But I had two very good conversations yesterday. We'll be talking about it.
It all came as Ukraine had been gaining ground with its drones targeting Russian supply lines and oil production. Now, the other G7 leaders weren't sure Trump saw the same picture. But by the summit's third day in the historic spa town of Evian, President Emmanuel Macron said something had shifted.
What I can tell you is that there was a turning point. There was a clear moment, an Evian moment regarding Ukraine. We all agreed to increase our support for Ukraine, to increase pressure on Russia, and to stay the course. This is a real change compared to the past few months.
All right, let's take a closer look at what Macron was talking about. In their joint declaration, G7 leaders, including Donald Trump, promised to boost military support for Ukraine and to strengthen sanctions against Russia. Now, the statement added, "We consider this the right moment to proceed with additional measures, as President Trump has delivered a deal that we support in reopening the Strait of Hormuz." And let's welcome Ivana Stradner now. She's a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies Russia program in Washington. Ivana, good to have you with us. Now, the European leaders seem somewhat surprised by the outcome of this summit regarding Ukraine. What were they expected? Were they expecting some kind of blow up or what?
I think a lot of leaders in Europe have been expecting for several months that Washington would eventually throw Ukraine under the bus and fully focus on the Middle East. However, the situation right now in Washington, D.C. is such that with not such a great deal in Iran, as we can see, Putin is watching, and Putin also wants to continue to negotiate. Meanwhile, I think it's very important to understand that President Trump is growing more and more tired of Putin's promises. He tried to negotiate with Russia for a very long time. He offered even certain concessions, and Putin never followed through on this agreement. So what happened in Europe right now, where they promised more sanctions and more weapons, this is a step in the right direction, because for Putin, actions speak louder than words. I just worry with what happened in Iran that Putin is learning and he will continue to seek concessions. So this is the right time for Europe and the United States to speak with one voice and to remember that Putin is not in a position to negotiate from strength. He is losing on the battlefield and he faces numerous problems back home.
So would you say this was the turning point for Ukraine as President Macron described it?
This is a very good moment for Ukraine as European and American policymakers are finally understanding that Putin is not willing to negotiate in good faith. And the only language that he understands is the language of power, which means more weapons and more sanctions to put the Kremlin on the defensive instead of allowing Putin to blackmail the West.
And why do you think Trump has warmed towards Ukraine's war aims? What exactly has changed?
President Trump was clear since day one that he wanted to end the war. And the problem over the past several months was a twofold problem. Number one, that Washington paid full attention to the Middle East but also that President Trump has been trying to accommodate also Putin, in sense trying to give certain concessions and trying to basically tell Ukraine that should give up certain territories, they should make certain bad deals. But President Trump is also understanding that if he really wants to end this war, this is the right moment, because Putin is not negotiating from strength. Two things: Putin is losing on the battlefield, and number two, economic situation in Russia is definitely not in the right spot. So this is the right moment to go back to the negotiation table and to tell Putin, if he is willing to end the war, that he should do it right now. Otherwise, more weapons are on the horizon, as well as sanctions. And finally, look, nobody likes a loser. And Ukraine has just shown an incredible bravery, but actually putting Russia on the defensive with drone production and with drone activities, as Putin, on the other hand, has been trying to intimidate NATO with drone incursions.
So we've seen after the talks with President Zelenskyy, Trump saying Russia has to make a deal. So do you have any idea what kind of deal this would be?
I like the way that he framed it, that Russia has to make the deal, because in the past he would always frame it as if Ukraine needs to make a deal. And in the past it was whether territory concessions or whether there were multiple bad deals. I think President Trump is very serious about sanctions. And we still have opportunities to impose even more secondary sanctions. But one thing that Putin fears more than anything else is advanced American weapons that would put Russia actually on the defensive and not allow Putin to continue with his threats. There is also another thing, which is that Putin has been trying to escalate always, and then de-escalate, and then position himself as a pillar of stability. And he has been doing that with nuclear threats, with other hyperballistic missiles, et cetera, et cetera. And the good news is that the West really doesn't fear any more such threats, because those threats have become obsolete. And right now, the most important thing is that Europe and Washington speak with one voice, because any disunity, and that's something that Putin has been trying to do, to polarize the West over Ukraine, would be a disastrous for Europe. And whoever believes, unless Putin is stopped now, whoever believes that Putin will stop in Ukraine is sorely mistaken, because there are multiple reports how Putin wants to also challenge NATO in the Baltics. And to make my position crystal clear, Putin doesn't need to send tanks and jets to any of those countries. All he has to do with serious hybrid warfare activities to basically challenge NATO and to make sure that NATO will not respond. There are two things what the West needs to do. I would love to see Germany, France, the UK, and the United States leading military exercises somewhere close to the Baltic states to show Putin that his threats will absolutely be meaningless. Number two is to have NATO readiness plan for any Putin's threats. Third thing, to have a very clear path towards weapons being ready to be sent to Ukraine unless Putin wants to stop the war. And the fourth thing is to unleash sanctions against Russia immediately. Just Europe several days ago, they issued more sanctions towards Russia. And this is a step in the right direction. But we also need more serious sanctions towards oil production and energy, because this is Russia's pillar of stability. And Putin would fear that more than anything else.
Interesting that over the past few months, that Trump has been focused on the Iran war. Just wondering whether that distraction or the importance of that distraction relating to the Ukraine war, was it necessarily a bad thing for Ukraine?
So with the situation in the Middle East, the United States was paying full attention over there. And we didn't see any process in negotiation moving forward. My concern is just that Putin also saw some parts of, what means how Iran was trying to negotiate with the United States. And I just worry that similar tactics Putin might adopt with his negotiation right now, whether to blackmail the West with energy, whether with further escalations, whether with fake promises that any ceasefire might actually serve for Russia to reposition its military and to continue. So given that we already saw how Iran has been negotiating in bad faith, I think there are numerous lessons that we need to learn and not to allow Putin to trick us into a bad deal, because he's not in a position to negotiate from strength.
But following what's happened in Evian from the G7 summit, what do you think Putin's reflections will be?
I'm quite certain that he's not happy to see Europe speaking with and America speaking with one voice. That's the last thing that he wants to see. And having those united responses is a nightmare for Putin. So this is a step in the right direction. But look, words are words, facts and facts, and actions are actions. So let's see whether Europe and the United States can put those words into actions and actually put Russia on the defensive and make sure that Putin ends this war.
And what about Vladimir Zelenskyy? What do you think he leaves with?
I truly hope that he is leaving these meetings with lots of hope, that finally the United States and Europe are speaking in one voice. And I also hope that he sent a very clear signal to both the United States and Europe that Putin is not willing to negotiate in good faith. And the only language that he understands is the language of power. So he's not negotiating from strength, meaning Putin is not negotiating from strength. So this is the right moment to put the Kremlin on the defensive.
Okay, Ivana Stradner, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
What do you think of these developments? Is this truly the turning point in the Ukraine war? Let us know in the comments.